What is all this talk about Israel annexing Palestinian territory? Well, back in January of 2020, Jared Kushner, President Donald Trump's son-in-law, unveiled the deal of the century, a plan supposedly engineered to bring peace to Palestine and Israel. Trump's plan stipulates that Israel will retain 30% of the West Bank, including all settlements built in the West Bank and the Jordan Valley. There will apparently be a pathway between the West Bank and Gaza to allow Palestinians to move back and forth. The map will look like this, although closer analysis shows that the West Bank will look more like an archipelago, like this. Emboldened by Trump's plan, and given that the Palestinian Authority dismissed it altogether, Netanyahu has decided to not wait for formal negotiations. In his mind, these territories will eventually be part of Israel, so why not sooner rather than later? It appears that the Israeli Knesset, or Israeli parliament, will discuss this annexation of Palestinian territory as early as July 1st, only a few weeks from today. So what do we mean by Palestinian territory? When we talk about the Palestinian territory, we are referring to the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip. Approximately 2,324 miles squared. That is to say, about the size of the state of Delaware. So what does annex mean? In general, the term annexation, or applying sovereignty, declares that territories considered occupied under international law become an integral part of the territory of the state annexing it. So back in 1980, Israel annexed East Jerusalem, and a year later, the Golan Heights. What exactly does Israel want to annex? How much territory will be annexed is still a bit unknown. Basically, Netanyahu plans to annex the Jordan Valley, which is the fertile strip of land that stretches from the north of the Dead Sea along the eastern perimeter of the West Bank and borders Jordan. The Jordan Valley represents 30% of the West Bank and is home to 65,000 Palestinians in 28 villages and to 11,000 Jewish settlers who are there under international law as illegal. He also plans to annex Jewish settlements in illegal outposts scattered in the rest of the West Bank, contravening international law. More than 400,000 Israelis already live in these settlements. Israeli government maps show about 22% of the West Bank will be annexed. Settlers are pressuring Netanyahu to annex even more. So what will happen to the Palestinians living in the areas that Israel wants to annex? As of now, it is uncertain what will happen with the 60,000 Palestinians that live in these lands. Netanyahu said that they will not be offered Israeli citizenship. It is still unclear if the Palestinian enclaves will remain under the Palestinian Authority's control, or if they'll be granted permanent residence in the newly expanded state of Israel. So what might be the consequences of annexation? First, it will end the quest for a viable, future autonomous Palestinian state. The annexation of the West Bank's Jordan Valley will deprive the future Palestinian state of land rich in minerals, water resources, and agricultural soil. It will also separate the future Palestinian state from the Jordan Valley, which forms the West Bank's eastern border with Jordan. The river feeds over 80,000 hectares of agricultural lands and fish farms. It will take from the Palestinians the only place viable for the expansion of existing communities, and annexation would prevent the construction of vital infrastructure projects. Annexation would confine Palestinians to non-contiguous enclaves beyond which they would need permission to travel. Palestinian farmers whose lands lies in the newly annexed territory would likely see it declared Israeli state property or seceded to Jewish settlements. According to the Israeli scholar Shaul Arieli, up to 23% of the annexed land is owned by Palestinians who would end up losing their private property. This annexation would not increase Israel's security. It would likely incur European retaliation and undermine Israel's security coordination with the Palestinian Authority and with Jordan. Stepping into this security vacuum would either be Hamas or Israel itself, in which case almost 3 million Palestinians across the West Bank would come under their direct and costly control, a scenario Israel would dearly like to avoid. Whatever territory Israel formally annexes would become very difficult, likely impossible, to give up under any future agreement. Those who can still imagine a two-state solution believe that annexation would be the final death blow. If Israel goes ahead with annexation, the time will have come to explore another option, a one-state solution in which Palestinians would struggle for equal rights.